You have probably heard two very different messages about challenging behavior. One says your child needs consequences, they need to learn that that behavior is just not acceptable. And the other one says that their behavior is communication, they can't help it, they have this disorder, this is just how it is, and you need to understand what is underneath it. And a lot of times you might just be left thinking, like, what is it? Like, is this just the way it is? And my answer is it's both. Behavior is communication. But we as parents still have a responsibility to teach them what to do with what they're communicating. We have to teach our kids to communicate in better ways. So I do believe that the behavior is telling us something. For me, I look at the way their brain is wired and their thoughts, and that is driving what's going on with the behavior. It's also being stuck kind of in that reactive, emotional part of the brain. So a child that is exploding, they're refusing, they're shutting down, they're arguing, even running away, destroying things, becoming aggressive, constantly interrupting, melting down over really simple things, like that is all telling us something. It's not necessarily consciously that they're telling us that, and it's not intentional. I don't believe that they are being manipulative because they've thought this all out and it's this grand scheme. The kids I deal with are mostly impulsive, and there's now and not now, and their behavior, the way that it's coming out, in some way it serves them. And that doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong as a parent. It's just almost like this happens and then this is what they do, and that their brain has to be taught a different way, and you have to be taught a different way to respond and react to it as well. So the behavior is just giving us information about things that are lacking in their executive functioning, in their skill sets, and maybe even emotionally. Just it shows us where they are, that is still there. Sometimes they really don't have the words to tell us. And so in therapy, they actually spend time teaching them like what that emotion is and the emotional part of it. And I find that a lot of kids can still be stuck in the emotional part of their brain and be able to tell you that they're really frustrated or angry, or you're making them mad, or whatever it is. Nervous system, though, is what's actually communicating for them, and that's the part that we want to be able to help them to communicate. So they may be feeling other things besides anger and defiance and all of those things. It's not just defiance or demand avoidance. It's sometimes that they don't know how to do something, or they have a lot of anxiety. It feels overwhelming. They feel powerless, and sometimes the other emotions add to that sense of powerlessness. They aren't saying to you, I'm overwhelmed, I don't feel like I have any control. Instead, their behavior is doing all of those things that they're actually lacking in feeling. So it's much easier for a child, instead of saying I'm embarrassed or I'm disappointed, to have some display of an emotion that gives them a sense of power and strength. And I really believe, and I practice this in everything that I do, that if they could do better, they would. I really believe that. I believe that most kids that are struggling with these behaviors, they're not as happy as they could be. They are sometimes, right? And some parents say, well, they're happy when they get their way. But they're not choosing, and they would choose, I believe, to have successful behavior if they had the skills and the regulation and the flexibility and the capacity to do it in that moment, just like we would. When we have times when we mess up, or we flip our lid or whatever, like we know that we want to do better. And kids may not be able to put it in words. They may not have a pattern of wanting to do better, or they may have tried and failed so many times in their mind that they aren't trying. But it doesn't mean that they're doing it on purpose. And I think that's really an important part of understanding that behavior is communication. And when we see that, it helps us to realize that there are things that we have to do. So it doesn't mean that the behavior is okay. We can't just stay there. We can't continue to communicate our feelings and our thoughts through destroying things or hurting people, no matter what level of whatever diagnosis your child has. They have to come to a place where we have better behaviors because we have better ways of communicating. So understanding what's going on in their brain to the best that you can understand it, the best that I can understand it, is still not excusing that behavior. And this is really the heart of what I want to tell you as a parent, because we're not approving this kind of communication. And we can understand why a child might have gotten upset. We can even put a diagnosis on it, like, oh, they have demand avoidance, or they're oppositionally defiant, and things like that. But we still have to teach them to do better with what they're given. We have to teach them to do better. So some kids, it means teaching them to be able to sit for a minute. Some kids, it means being able to teach them to use their hands in a more gentle way, and to use their words if they have words, or to use whatever tools they have accessible that isn't hurting somebody or hurting themselves. So you can understand why a child hit somebody or why they got upset, and you can still say, we're not hitting, you may not hit. And we can understand why they were screaming, and we can still teach them to communicate without screaming. And I really want to focus in on the teaching part of it, because when we understand that behavior is communication, that means that we have to teach better communication. And that is so different than just being frustrated or disciplining or punishing and rewarding behavior. It is about teaching. Understand why kids are refusing to do things, whether it's joining a family activity or refusing to go to school, refusing to participate in a family activity. We can have all the understanding around that, about it's hard for them, or they have anxiety, or they're worried about something, and yet we can still expect them to participate at their level. So we can also understand why their brain might be completely overwhelmed, and yet we still have to create that safety and that structure and help them to grow and develop. And sometimes this is where we get stuck as parents. We can understand why he's doing it, then I have to let it go, because we somehow equate compassion and understanding with acceptance of what's happening. Understanding gives you information, but it doesn't remove the responsibility you have as a parent to lead this child in a different way, to a different way of doing things. So this is the question that changes everything. So instead of asking, how do I stop this behavior? We get to think about this differently. We get to think about, what is this behavior communicating and what's happening underneath it. I like to identify the feeling that is underneath the anger or the destruction of what happened, or the refusal. And then we get to think about what skill is missing. Is this about regulation? Is this about cause and effect? Is this teaching flexibility? Is this helping with impulse control, communication? What executive functioning skill is lacking here? What about problem solving? Can we help them to solve this problem in a different way when they're getting frustrated and they can only see one thing that's not working, and they're not even thinking about anything else. These are all really good things to be aware of, to be thinking about. But we also get to think about, what do I need to teach next? And that's where the parenting part of it comes in. We're not just observing behaviors. We're not just noticing where things are lacking or how we feel about the things that are happening. We have to think about what we can do to give your child the information so that they can learn, and how can they learn these skills. And that's the part that's, I think, is tricky, right? Because there's not a lot of information about that, and there's a whole way that your household runs that may have to be interrupted so that we can teach these skills, even though your child might be 9 or 11 or 14 or even older. We have to go back and teach some of these skills where they're lacking. But what if this is just how they are? I mean, that's a good, valid question. I don't want parents to use a diagnosis, a trauma history, neurodivergence, attachment history, or difficult temperament as a reason to stop believing that your child can grow. I believe that it can always get better, that we're growing and developing, and that we can help our child to do that too. Even if they're severely stunted in their growth and development, we can accommodate. But that accommodation doesn't mean that this is just how they are, so everyone else has to live with it. Instead, it says this is where they are right now, and how do we build from there? What is the next skill set? What is the next thing that we want our child to learn? And this is really important, because your child's brain is going to make certain things harder. There's a 30% lag with kids that have ADHD. But it doesn't mean that they're incapable of learning. They're going to learn it at a different pace. So you may be thinking, like, you are 9 years old, you should know better by now. You are already taught how to be polite, how to give a good response, how to, not hit people, right? You learned not to hit and bite when you were 2, but now here we are. And it doesn't mean that they're incapable of learning. It means that we have to go back sometimes and fill in some potholes along the way that got missed because of other things that were going on inside of their brain. A child can have a legitimate limitation and still make progress. So what does improvement actually look like? Maybe it looks like my child stopped doing that behavior. But sometimes at first, progress might look like the explosion lasts 20 minutes instead of an hour. They recover faster. Maybe they're having fewer meltdowns. We've only had one meltdown this week. Maybe it starts to be where you can see that what the inciting incident was and what caused it, where before it just seemed like, I don't know, it was out of the blue. Now we're starting to be able to take it apart. Maybe they're able to ask for help or say that they can't do something, and before they just explode and get frustrated. Maybe they're able to identify what happened afterwards. Maybe they need fewer reminders, less prompts. They start giving good responses. They stop hitting, and maybe yet they're still yelling. But we're not hitting, we're not hurting people. And so that doesn't mean we stop there, but we notice the progress that we're making. We notice the gains that are being made. They can repair now, they can say they're sorry, they can feel remorse, they can want to do better. That is all progress. They start being able to tolerate discomfort or disappointment because they can identify it as that, and it becomes a different thing than this big life-changing, the world is ending. Maybe they're able to come back to a conversation. Maybe they're able to delay gratification for longer. They're able to sit at the table longer. They're able to wait. They're able to get their body calm. So we don't measure progress only by whether the behavior never happens again. We look at the frequency, we look at the intensity, duration, and the recovery, the skill development, and the repair. And when you are able to see the gains that are made, it's going to help you to be so much more encouraged than when you're constantly looking at like, oh my gosh, like I'm still walking on eggshells. And it allows you to be able to let go of the past and not keep operating as if this was still the way it was. This gives you hope without pretending that change is just going to happen overnight. So I want to give you something practical. When your child has a challenging behavior, I want you to pause and think, what is this telling me? I thought we were over this, or I thought we already knew this, or I didn't think this was going to happen anymore. What is the sign that is there? What is it telling you? And what does your child need to learn? And what is your response to teaching right now? So it's not a lecture. It's not going to come because you told them this. We're not, making a demand on them, but for you to take a pause and to think like, oh, I didn't realize we still needed to work on that. I thought we were over that. Sometimes our response accidentally teaches that screaming gets negotiation, or escalation gets attention, or people know that I don't like the word no, so they're not going to demand anything of me or tell me no. Aggression changes the boundaries because we get so worried about safety. Maybe they're inadvertently learning that arguing creates 15 more conversations, that they can take us down that rabbit hole. Or now we're not even talking about what happened, we're talking about something else. So we can be compassionate without making the behavior effective. So we need to think about what they're gaining in it and how we can come around it in a different way. And that's the sweet spot of what we're working on. So your job this week is to notice these things, to look at these things, to think through these things. Your child is not just their behavior. The behavior gives us information, and it tells us something about what's happening inside of them. But our job is not to shame them for that information, but it's also not to just excuse it and say, okay, this is just how they are. It gives us information about where they are right now, and really in that moment, and maybe the moment before of it. But it doesn't mean that we're going to stay there. Where we are now is not where we're staying. Our job is to listen to what the behavior is communicating, and then create that safety and structure that they need and teach them the skills that they don't have yet. And I know that this is really hard to do by yourself, really hard to do. And that's why I work with parents, because I don't believe that you have to be the perfect parent, and I also don't believe that your child is broken. I believe that you are stuck with some behaviors that you're seeing today because it's hard to figure out in the middle of it how to come around it a different way, how to teach these skills when you've been dealing with the behavior for years, and you're tired and you're worn out, and maybe you're even afraid of what's going to happen next or if it's going to get worse. The information is in the behavior for sure, and we can understand it, and together we can figure out what to do next. So listen to what the behavior is telling you, but please don't let it become the family's permanent language.